many of my listeners and viewers may recognize the voice face also from the documentary The Last Dance that was quite popular over a 5-week period on ESPN. And, you know, how about the fact that it's 2020 and Jordan is putting out a statement on this subject that he is still considered one of the titans of our sports world, and it is now, oh gosh, almost 2 decades since he's actually laced him up, Dr. Boyd.
Well, you know, when you talk about Mike, I mean, you're talking about one of the, you know, maybe 2 or 3 most popular athletes in American history. So, you know, that's a very lofty status. I think, you know, one of the things that came up on The Last Dance was that conversation about, you know, Mike's refusal to or desire not to endorse Harvey Gantt back in the early 90s
Yes.
when he was running against Jesse Helms. You know, I think knowing what he knows now, he recognizes that that was a missed opportunity. And I think what we've seen from him since that time on a number of issues has been at least, you know, more public association with political issues through statements, through donations, through things of this nature. You know, but everybody's sitting up in the house because of COVID, and ESPN moves up, you know, the Last Dance documentary. Everybody's watching and talking about it. It almost felt to me like we were back in that era when there were only 3 networks and everybody was watching the same thing. It's rare that, you know, everybody's sort of zoned in on, you know, one show. I think that broke up the boredom, and it also increased the number of people who want to know who the maker of my eyeglasses are. So,
well, I mean, you want to throw that. You want to throw that out there and answer the question? I mean,
well, you know, I have not answered the question because with me, as I'm sure you can tell, just in our conversation, it's never yes or no. It's never simple.
Yes.
So I'm going to be quiet for now, and then I'm going to hold a decision like press conference the way LeBron did and make the announcement.
Okay.
That's what I've decided to do.
If you want me to play the role of Jim Gray, I'll do that for your.
Let's do it, man. Let's do it.
Be more than happy to do that. Did you learn anything from that documentary? Is there something that you picked up from that you did not know or needed a question answered?
I wouldn't say I learned anything because I have been studying, you know, that era and those times, and I've written books about it and been immersed in it. I lived it, you know.
Yes.
First time I met, you know, Mike was back in Detroit in the late 80s after watching him unfortunately give my Pistons 59 points on Easter Sunday. You know, that was back in the late 80s. So, you know, having lived it and, of course, the work I do, having studied it, there's not much to learn. It was nice to, at least for me, because I try to be on top of that, but it was nice to relive all that. And I guess if I had one favorite moment that didn't involve myself, it was watching Mike laugh at Gary Payton, and this the way he said the glove with that question mark and exclamation point at the end of it. Just that response is to me, that's the documentary right there. Like, you know, the glove as he looks at that iPad. But, you know, there's a lot of moments in there that are funny and kind of nice to relive all that. I think it was a, you know, excellent presentation, and I think it did a lot, you know, for the people who watched it in terms of dealing with the monotony that, you know, sort of COVID had brought into our lives.
No question about it. And I had David Aldridge on the show Friday, Dr. Boyd, and I said to him, you know, at least you weren't one of those people on the iPad handed to Jordan. You did not want to be that person when that happened during the doc. That was the last thing you wanted to be, was the person on an iPad that Jason Hare, the director, handed to Jordan for his perusal.
Yes.
And immediate reaction. And by the way, that I would take an 11th episode of all the cutting room floor moments. I'm sure not all the iPad moments being handed to Michael made it on the air, I would imagine.
Right. Well, you could easily do the making of The Last Dance. That'd be interesting as well.
And could you imagine if there was social media when Rodman was playing, Dr. Boyd? Could you imagine what that would have been like?
The entire time I'm watching the documentary, I just kept thinking if all of this had transpired during the era of social media, I mean, Rodman would have certainly demanded attention, but, to have lived through that myself with no social media now, recognizing how the world has changed because of social media. Rodman marrying himself in the age of social media, that would have most certainly broken the internet, as they say. It's kind of hard to imagine, but at the same time, when you think about that era, you think about the fact that there was no social media, and here we are, 20-plus years later, and it's like it just happened yesterday. So that speaks to, how those moments cemented themselves in our culture and our history, the fact that, we're still into it, so many years having passed. A lot of people do things that in the moment they're popular, and then, particularly now, 24-hour news cycle, there's a new story every day. But you look at that and you're like, this happened 22, 30 years ago, depending on the episode and the segment, and we're still talking about it. So that tells us how important it is to our culture.
No doubt.